Hello! In this video I'd like to talk a bit about welding and in particular the equipment that you absolutely need in order to get started. A lot of people seem to get put off welding because they think it's going to be really expensive or they're just a bit scared of it or think it's going to be really hard. It is a bit tricky, but you can easily get to grips with it. It's not that difficult. For building a CNC machine, steel box section in particular is really good. It's strong, it's relatively cheap, and it's easy to stick together once you get the hang of welding. I built my CNC frame with steel box section, and I've got very basic skills when it comes to welding, and I had no prior experience, just a bit of practice before I started putting the frame together. You can buy pretty basic kit and you can get good results. And no, you don't need to get an electrician in to fit an expensive new power supply. I run my setup entirely from a 13 amp socket, and I've yet to blow a fuse. So let's get to it and have a look at what equipment you need. So the first thing is somewhere to weld. I've got a very small shop, and over here, which you've probably seen on lots of my other videos, is this big lump of steel. I think it's 10 or 12 mil thick. I bought it from a guy in Telford while I was doing some work over there, and it's been brilliant. It weighs a ton, it's nice and thick. I didn't buy an expensive welding table. It didn't cost a great deal. I can't remember now, it's been a few years since I've had it. But if you get splatter on it, if you damage it, you can just put a grinder to it, and it will, and you can get it back to a nice surface. I've drilled and tapped some holes in it as well, which you can use for fixing clamps. So I've fixed clamps to it before. It's been brilliant, and it weighs a ton, so it stays on the bench. The other good thing is that my vise there also tapped into it, and it gives it a really nice solid base to that. And all that sits on is just a makeshift bench that I made out of some 18mm ply and some timber members. I think they were just bits of stud, because that was what was cheapest at the time. Safety is obviously a big deal, and you need to protect yourself because the arc is obviously very hot, so you're going to need some decent gloves. Nice thick gloves. Again, they don't need to be expensive. Don't know how much these were. They were pretty cheap. Now I have got one of these, which is like a fire retardant boiler suit, but to be honest, it's a bit of an overkill, and for the most part it's too hot to wear. So generally I just wear a long sleeve cotton jumper, and it's been absolutely fine. I've also tried just using an old leather jacket. Again, worked fine. So something to protect you from sparks, something to protect you from heat. Obviously metal, once it's been welded and while you're welding it, gets very hot. So again, gloves to protect your hands. So gauntlets, gloves, and something with long sleeves that doesn't burn. You don't want to wear a paper suit. That'd be a bad idea. The other thing that you need is a visor. Now, this is the first one that I got. This thing. And it's a step up from the sort of hold it in front of your face thing that you often get free with welders. Now the hold it in front of your face ones I definitely wouldn't recommend. You need both your hands free really to be able to hold things. You certainly need one hand free, and it's just hopeless having your, particularly when you're learning, trying to have one hand always tied up. So I'd at least recommend one of these. Now this one has got a fixed glass on it. So when you put this over, you can see it's completely dark. You can't see a thing. Now this one you can lift up and then you can see through it. So, and then that folds down and is then blacked out. And the idea with that is that it's easier to flick this up, see what you're doing, get in the right position, flick that down. The annoying thing is again, you need a hand to be able to flick it up and down. You'll see kind of pros at work with their expensive fixed lens helmets where they can get this set and then just sort of flick their heads and down it comes. But again, if you're just learning, you want to stay in nice in a position. If you start doing this with your head, your hands move again. They're okay, but I quickly realised that one area where I needed to invest was a decent welding helmet or mask, and I got one of these, which this was a pretty inexpensive, if I remember rightly, auto darkening helmet. So with this one, you've got a slightly sort of green tinge as you look through it, but as soon as you strike an arc, this section at the top here senses it, and immediately it changes to being blacked out. You can adjust on the side how dark you want it to be, and you can adjust the sensitivity and the delay of it coming on the inside. So super useful, because it basically means that you can have it on, you can be set. As soon as you strike the arc, you're not going to move, you're not going to lift your hands, you're not going to wag your head around. Yeah, works an absolute treat, and it's pretty instantaneous. I don't know whether I can get this light down low enough to be able to. Is it going to work? There, can you see it coming on and off as I put the light near it? So, yeah, there you go. So, this guy, definitely recommend an auto darkening helmet. Whilst it's a bit of an investment, it definitely makes welding a lot more of an enjoyable experience. So, welding helmet. And the final piece of health and safety equipment is a fire extinguisher, which I keep back here. You need to make sure you've got one, obviously, that is suitable for use on electrical fires. Yeah, never had to use it yet, but it's there if I need it. Okay, so for the main event. So this is my welder. Dusty and reasonably well used now. It, again, was not the most expensive model. It was not the cheapest, but it's this one's called an Easy Arc 160 from Clarkweld. It's, again, it's at the cheaper end of the market. It's a pretty basic, what they call a buzz box. I'll switch it on a bit later and you'll hear it. It has its name comes from it being the sound it makes. And yeah, it's just a basic stick welder. So in here goes the electrode. This clips to either the piece you're working on or to your conductive bench. You turn this wheel here to adjust the current, and you turn it on here, and that's literally it. It doesn't come with a plug, but I just wired this one to a heavy duty 13 amp socket, and away you go. Works a treat. It is, however, pretty heavy. So, welder. Now, need something to weld with. So, again, welding electrodes. Now, these ones are 2.5mm. They come in different widths depending on what thickness of steel you're working with. These ones were pretty cheap. They work okay, but I have subsequently replaced and used when I actually did my CNC machine. I used better quality electrodes in these. One's called Siftrode, which were very good. However, these are the ones I've got in the garage at the moment. So there's the electrodes. Now, the thing with stick welding, which is what this is you get a layer of what's called slag forming over your weld, and you need something to be able to scrub that off. So you need a wire brush. And I've got a couple of those. And you can, although it's not essential, invest in a slag chipping hammer, which you could use to chip it off. This one was off eBay and is pretty ropey. It isn't damage on it from me using it. This is pretty much as it was delivered. Yeah, high quality tool, but it does the job. And then you need some things to be able to hold your work in place. So G-clamps are super useful. Again, you don't want plastic stuff because it's going to things get hot. G-clamps, and then these guys, vice grips, again are really useful because you can quickly clamp things onto your workbench or things together. So again, got a couple of them. The other thing I found was quite useful is one of these magnet things. Again, cheap rubbish, but it does the job. You shouldn't rely on it to provide you with a nice accurate angle, but again, for clamping stuff together quickly, that it magnets onto the workbench, and then you can, if you've got a piece of steel that you're working on, it then will hold that in place, and then you can come along and weld against it. So yeah, various clamping mechanisms, all essential. Now another thing you're going to need is some way of cutting and grinding metal. Now I've got again, this is just a cheap B&Q angle grinder, but does the job. Perfect for buffing up welds, for cleaning off slag, for removing mill scale off metal. This is what you need, and you can get massive ones, you can get expensive ones, but effectively it's a motor that spins a thing and you plug it in, and you don't need the Rolls Royce of angle grinders. This one was, I don't know, 20 quid or something, and it's been absolutely perfect. And then the other things you're going to need are the attachments for it. So these things are called flap discs. It's basically bits of sandpaper on a disc. These things, which I don't know what they're called. It's called a coarse cleaning fleece, according to the back. Those are really good for cleaning off rust or surface muck on your metal. Those are really good. You can just get bits of sandpaper in the shape of a disc. Again, these can be quite aggressive. And then you can get grinding discs, which you can use for really aggressive grinding. And then you can get cutting discs, which are like grinding discs but much thinner, and you can use this to cut steel. Now if you were cutting anything of any kind of thickness, really, you're going to be there for a long time cutting it with a little wheel like this. It's possible, and you could do it. You could also use a hacksaw. Again, if it just takes a long time, but it is doable, and to get started you don't really need any more than this, I suppose. But this is where I did end up spending a bit of money, or I should say my parents spent a bit of money. I had this for Christmas. Check out this bad boy. Right, so this thing is a cut-off saw, specifically designed for cutting steel. It makes a terrific noise. It chucks little fragments of steel everywhere, but it goes through it like butter. I would absolutely recommend one of those. You can get ones which are basically these on steroids. They're like 300mm wide, but they make an immense amount of sparks. Very messy and a bit slow and a bit inaccurate. Whereas one of those with a steel blade with the right type of teeth on it works a treat. Please note that just using a wood cutting chop saw with a grinding blade in it or with one of those metal cutting blades in it won't work, or it may work, but it's not recommended because it spins way too fast. These ones spin a lot slower. So yeah, quite expensive. I think that was about, I don't know, £200 or something, but well worth the investment if and when you come to build something like a big frame. And it's pretty precise, so you can cut with a reasonable degree of accuracy, which obviously is important for something like a CNC machine. Now, the other nice to have is some way of extracting fumes. Again, as I said, this is a pretty small space. If you've got some huge warehouse, it's maybe not such a big deal, but in here it fills with smoke really fast. I did start off by just wearing a bit of a mask, but you go and blow your nose after you've been in welding for a while, and yeah, if you see some nasty black stuff in the tissue, it's not great. So you can buy really expensive, again, extraction systems. Considering how much I weld, which is pretty infrequently, it seemed a bit excessive. So I've went for a slightly more low-tech solution. Get it out, there you go. So this is just a big portable ventilator. This one's a Sealy one. It wasn't massively expensive, certainly not when you compare it to extraction systems. And this I have attached to, you can see up here, this tube. So when I'm welding, I have that dangling down with the end over where the smoke is coming up, and then that runs over the top, and then I just basically poke it out the door there. So as I'm welding, it's sucking all the muck and chucking it out the door. So I'm not breathing it, or at least not breathing in so much. So yeah, depends whether you like your lungs enough to warrant the spend, but like, I think it's worth it. So that's basically all the kit that you need, and then some steel. When I started, I went down to a local steel supplier and fabricator and just asked for bits of offcuts, and they gave me a ton of little bits and bobs like this sort of size, which is what you need really to be able to start practicing. So that's the last piece, I think, in the jigsaw. So I'll get this lot set up, and then yeah, we'll get it turned on. So this end here goes on the bench like that. Now, when this is just a bit that I've used in the past just to practice on, so it's a bit of a mess, but I'll do for now. So when that's sat on the table, the electric current can flow through this lump of steel and into here, which means I haven't got to have that attached to this, which is obviously an inferior setup, but does work. In fact, when I first started, I didn't have this, so I just used a sheet of scrap plywood and attached this directly onto it. It all got covered in burnt marks from sparks and what have you, and clearly having something inflammable, something that doesn't burn, and made of metal, made of steel, is much more preferable. In terms of amperage, this doodah here, when you spin it round, it adjusts this dial on the top here, and it recommends, according to this, hang on, let's see that, there you go, so this little bar here pretty imprecisely moves up and down when you turn that, and it recommends, depending on what size of electrode, how many amps you ought to be using. So these ones are, did I say they're 2.5? 2.5 mil. So I've got that set at somewhere between 75 and 90 amps, and at that I've pretty much left it at that. I've never really changed it, and it's always worked fine. Now, one thing I don't do is use an extension lead for this, so it pretty much always ends up on the floor, so I can reach across to a socket. So I've just reclamped it to this end of the bench, and I've still got enough slack then to be able to get the electrode holder near the bench. So just pop that on the floor. Right, next thing is to get myself covered up. Just realised I've forgotten one really important piece of safety equipment. These safety goggles. If you're using a chipping hammer, if you're doing any grinding, watch your eyes. So I always put these on underneath this, and then they're ready to go and you don't forget to put them on. Yep, so apologies, forgot about that. The other thing I always tend to do is I've got a couple of lights in here that are dangling down. I tend to just put my eyes close to that and just double check that this is working, and the light sensor, and it will click in and out, and then I know that I'm not going to get blinded, which is a good thing. Right, I'm not going to bother because I'm not doing any serious welding today. I'm just showing off. I'm going to put this away. It's a bit of a faff to set up. So, right, so arms covered, gloves. Now, the important thing to remember is that once this is in the electrode holder, if this comes into contact with the welding table, it will arc. So just keep it well away, keep this out of it ideally, until you're absolutely ready and your visor's down. I've never welded on film before, so listen out for the buzz when I turn it on. I don't know whether you can hear that. So as soon as I bring this into contact, I'll strike across and you'll see the arc form. You see that? Ah, I love the smell of it. It smells beautiful. Right, so I haven't welded in a little while, so goodness knows how this is going to turn out. But you can see there what it looks like once you've finished. So it's got this coating of slag on it, which should just kind of flake off. And this is where you can use this chipping hammer just to break off these chunks of slag. And underneath there you can see the shiny weld, but it still have little chunks around the outside, which is why you then want the wire brush to give it a good scrub. Now this piece of metal will be hot, really hot, so make sure on the hand that's touching it you keep your glove on. There you go. And the first thing to practice is just running these beads, striking the arc, running a bead, striking an arc, running a bead, and then once you've done that, you can then move on to trying to just join nice easy 90-degree joints like this one. So this is one of my practice ones before I started doing my frame. So just striking one end, running along, forming a nice angle bead. There you go. It really is as easy as that. So thanks for watching, hope you found it useful. I am going to try and post videos again a bit more regularly, but if you haven't already seen my videos about my my CNC build, please do catch up on those, and if you like this video then please give it a thumbs up, and yeah, I'll see you on the next video.